Hey everybody, Bearded Rogue here, and today I want to talk to you about Paper Tales. The name is only on the sides of the box. The front is this very amazing artwork. And it's one of the things that really drew me to this game is the paper craft looking artwork of this game is really, really cool. Also, I'd heard that it was basically Seven Wonders light. Both of those things were intriguing to me. Smaller, faster Seven Wonders that people could get playing early was really appealing, and I really wanted to check it out. It's been sitting on my unplayed shelf for about 6 months. I brought it to Dragonflight so that I could get a chance to play it, and I actually ended up playing it 3 times over the course of the weekend, which is pretty cool. Being able to play a game that many times in a row and really dig into it and take a look at it in such a short time period. Normally I get multiple plays of a game, but there's big gaps of time between them because I'm often find myself playing whatever new game someone just got. It was fun to be able to do that. So I'm going to go through some of the things about the game that I liked and that I disliked and that are really big positives and maybe a few negatives here, just to give you some idea of what this game is like. So first of all, I will say that I enjoy the gameplay of Paper Tales. It is a drafting game. It is a tableau builder. Both of those things it has in common with Seven Wonders. It's pretty simple to learn and play. And one of the things that makes that so is that if you see on this game turn card here, each one of the phases has a specific icon and a number associated with it. The abilities on all of the cards have that icon on them indicating which phase they trigger in. So if you have any doubts about when something happens, it's very clearly coded on all of the cards. This is something that I have not seen in a lot of games and is very, very welcome. Having each phase have an icon and a number and then coding the cards in the graphic design to indicate, like this has 3 abilities, but it indicates phase 2, phase 2, phase 6. So you know that 2 of the abilities happen on deployment, and 1 of them happens in the aging phase. This card, every player gets a reference card in their player color. It's colored so that you know which color you are on the scoreboard as score is tracked throughout the game. So the layout of the reference card is very well done, and the graphic design and the thought of including the icons and the numbers for the phases is brilliant as far as I'm concerned. I wish more games did something like this to indicate when cards can take actions. Really, really cool. I showed the scoreboard there briefly. I kind of hate the scoreboard because of the way it wraps around the track like this. I mean, it could be worse. It isn't a huge snake, but it's them trying to make the boards as small as it can be while still giving enough room for the discs to pass through. I do like the victory point scroll icon is used everywhere. Again, consistent graphic design, but them putting it periodically, basically every 5, is a really cool flourish. Makes counting a little bit easier. So even though it is a snake track, and I absolutely hate it, I think some of the things that they did, like making the spaces very large and highlighting every 5th space, makes me forgive it a little bit. Although, why does this hit 16? Why isn't it 15 or 20? I don't know. The other part here is the phases, so you'll have a marker on each phase as you go through. You play 4 phases of the game, unlike the 3 of Seven Wonders. This is pretty cool because it means that you pass clockwise, counterclockwise, clockwise, counterclockwise. So you pass both directions an even number of times throughout the course of the game. Also, you just play 4 phases and then the game is over. It's a very clear timer and the reminder of which direction you draft cards or pass when you draft cards is very, very well done. It is a sturdy scoreboard. I just don't like the snake layout. Otherwise, very, very well done functional item in that regard. So let's go into a little bit of detail about the game. So, it is a drafting game and it is a tableau builder. So, you have various cards, and I'm going to try to pick something really basic to display first that looks like this. So, on this card you have a couple of different pieces of information. Up here is in the gold coin is the gold cost for the card. Gold is the one resource that you actually spend in the game. You actually acquire and spend it as you go through. This little icon here tells you how many of this card are in the deck. There is just one big deck of cards. It's not split up into ages or anything like in Seven Wonders. It's just one big deck of cards. I found that in any count other than 4-player, you do not get through the whole deck. In 4-player, you do get through the whole deck and have to shuffle for the last round, typically. So just keep that in mind. I think if the expansion adds cards, it would make it so that even in a 4-player game, you would not have to shuffle the deck. I do not have the expansion. I have not played with the expansion, so that's pretty much the last I'm going to talk about it. This right here is the strength of the unit in combat, or in war, and we'll get to that in a minute. These are the other resources in the game. There's actually one that's not on this card, so wood and meat or food. The other one is gems, which is a little purple pillar that looks like this, and we'll get into what this card is in a minute, but looks like that. So those are the 3 resources in the game, and like Seven Wonders, when paying costs using those resources, you just have to have them in your tableau. You don't spend them, there's no change, you just have them or you don't. So that's another way that it is similar. And all of the cards have their ability down here in a text box of various size. This one just gives you resources while it's in play, so it has a fairly small text box. But some of the more involved cards, like the Kraken here, have a text box that takes up about half of the card. This is one of the bigger critters in the game, and we'll talk more about him in a minute. But the game plays in phases, as I said. And so the first phase is the recruitment phase. This is basically where you draft cards. Everybody gets 5 cards. Everybody draws a card from the hand, passes it clockwise or counterclockwise, depending on the round, and then draws a card from that next hand, or chooses a card from that next hand and passes until all 5 cards have been claimed. So you will have 5 cards in your hand each round. When you go to do the deployment phase. The deployment phase is when you actually play cards to your tableau. So this is a change from Seven Wonders a little bit, in that in Seven Wonders you draft and then you use your card immediately. In this, you draft all of your cards and then you go to deployment. And your tableau is a 2x2 square. So you'll have basically 4 cards on the table in a... I'm going to kind of hold this in the air, 2x2 square. And then, once everybody's got all of the cards that they're going to play, they flip them over and they pay the gold cost on those cards. Obviously, if you can't pay the gold cost, you discard whatever it is. Why you would play a card without being able to pay its gold cost, I am not sure. Anything that you do not use is discarded with the exception of 1 card. You are allowed to carry 1 card from round to round, which is pretty cool. If you get one of the big bads like the Kraken here, or even the Dragon or the Demon, which takes a little bit of planning, you can kind of carry them to the next round in order to play them. You can also use that to carry combo pieces forward, which is pretty neat. The card that you maintain from round to round doesn't have to be the same, but you're only ever allowed 1. So you may find yourself discarding the card that you kept after the first round if your next draft has better cards than what you kept. Deployment phase is done simultaneously. Everybody places their cards in their tableau, and then everybody flips them and uses them. Again, the iconography here is very, very good because anything that takes place during the deployment phase has a deployment phase icon with a 2 and that little card icon. Any ability like that basically happens whenever it flips over. You know, that's basically what this is. When it flips over, this particular guy adds aging tokens to all of your other units, and we'll get into what aging is when we get to that phase of the game. But it's very clear which abilities activate when you flip. For example, this Kraken has 2 abilities that activate when it flips, and then one that happens in the aging phase, which, of course, we'll get to. After deployment and everybody's paid for all of their units, you get to the war phase. War is very similar to Seven Wonders in that you compare the strength of your units to the people to your left and right. So in a 3-player game, both of the other players at the table are being compared to you. In a 4-player game, there's one player who's across the table from you who you do not compare against. You're only your left and your immediate left and your immediate right. Now, one caveat on that is that you only compare the units that are in your front rank, not any that are in your back rank, unless they have an ability that specifies that they count their strength for the back rank during war. Archers, and there's I believe, a combat strategist in the game who have that ability to fight wars from the rear of your tableau. Yeah, here's an archer. And as you can see, it says Archer can fight from the back. And again, it is labeled with the handy-dandy war icon to tell you that that's the phase that his ability is relevant in. So this guy can fight from the back. There's a couple of other cards. I think there may be only one other card that can fight from the back. But the majority of your combat is going to happen with your front rank. You'll compare all of your strengths against your neighbors. If you win the war, you get 3 points. If you lose the war, you get 0 points. Ties are friendly in this game, so if both of you have the same amount of power for war, you both get the points. And that makes it a little bit less cutthroat than Seven Wonders. However, war is a huge part of this game, and we'll get a little bit more into that after I've kind of gone through the phases. Next, after war and everybody gets their points or activates any war abilities, is the income phase, which is this little money bag. Everybody gets 2 gold, which is, again, the only resource that you spend, plus any abilities that have the little gold bag symbol will trigger. Most of the abilities with gold bags in front of them give you gold, specifically. And let me see if I can find one here. Most of them give you gold during that phase. Having problems finding one here in the deck. They're all buried. But getting gold is very important in this game. Gold is very tight. You are going to have a hard time affording all of the units that you want to play. Yeah, here's the blacksmith. They have the little money bag, and as you can see, they give you 1 gold. Some of them are more involved in this. They'll give you gold based on certain criteria. This is the 0 cost, just get a gold on your income phase, meaning that you would get 3 because you always get 2. This would give you another one. You only start the game with 3 money. So any income that you get is a pretty big deal over the course of the game. Gold also comes into play in the next phase, which we'll talk about during that phase, but just know that gold is pretty important in this game, and 0 cost units are going to be really, really handy for filling out your tableau until you have income producing on the board. Otherwise, you're limited to just your 2 income that you get per turn, and that can really, really stifle your ability to actually grow over the course of the game. Next is construction, this handy-dandy little tower icon. And in the construction phase, you get to construct one or upgrade one building. You cannot do both. You cannot build and upgrade. And let's talk about buildings for a second. I held one of them up earlier, one of these cards, and said I would get to it. Now is that time. So a building card has a couple of things on it. Number one, it will tell you which version of the building it is. This is the level 1 version of this building, the mine. Again, the victory point scroll up here tells you how many victory points it's worth at the end of the game. And then there is an ability here in brown, the same color as the icon up here, that lets you know what ability you gain from it when you play it in level 1 form. This right here with the level 1 icon and the wood here is the cost to build it as a level 1 building. So you have to have 1 wood somewhere in your kingdom, whether that's on another building or one of your characters in play, like this one right here has a wood. That would let you build this. If you had this in your tableau, you could build this with no problems. Now, that's level 1. The pale version, the grayed out almost version here, is what will happen if you build the level 2 or upgrade to the level 2 version of this building. So it tells you what it will do. And then the cost, again, with the 2 icon here, is 1 wood and 1 gem, but you also have to pay this 1 wood either to put it in as a level 1 building, or what's really awesome is you can go right to level 2 if you pay both the level 1 and level 2 costs. So if I paid 2 wood and a gem, I could put this into play on its level 2 side immediately. Instead of building it one turn and then upgrading it the next turn, I could put it into play on its level 2 side. Which is really, really cool. Now, you start the game with 5 buildings that you can build, but there are only 4 phases in the game. You can only build 1 building a turn, so you will never build all 5 of your buildings. It is not possible. The most you can build is 4, and that's if you build 1 a turn and never upgrade any of them. Never use your construction phase to upgrade. Now on the level 2 side, again, it's got this silver coloring to it, and the level 2 icon, which is used down here with the level 2 cost as well, to make that a little bit more obvious. Again, the ability box is now silver to match the level 2. It includes the level 1 ability as well as the level 2 ability, which again has a handy-dandy little icon on it if it is one that triggers during a specific phase. Again, the victory point scroll up here, telling you how many victory points it's worth. All of the buildings are 1 point on their level 1 side and 3 points on their level 2 side, meaning the most points you can possibly score from buildings, not counting abilities that they give you to score victory points, is 12. Okay? You can score 12 points from buildings if you can get 4 level 2 buildings out on the table. That's basically how that works. One of the cool things about level 2 buildings is that they actually improve your tableau. So normally, like I said, you have a 2x2 square of units. As you can see here, this little icon, if you have a single, just one level 2 building, you now have a 3rd slot in your front row. You still only have 2 slots in your back row, but you gain a 3rd slot in your front row. Remember, your front row is the row that fights in wars, and wars are very important. This building further reinforces that because it says, in wars, you get 2 victory points for each gem that is in your kingdom. Now, that's irrelevant of whether or not you're winning wars. That's just during the war phase, you get 2 victory points for every gem that is in your kingdom. And it gives you a gem. So it's guaranteed to be basically 2 victory points per war phase once you put it into play. So if you played this on the first turn of the game and got it in at level 2, you would get 3 points at the end of the game plus 2 points per round, giving you another 8 points. So it would be an 11-point building by itself. Pretty darn good for the cost of building it. The other buildings have similar abilities. A lot of them are related to war. The barracks, obviously, both of its abilities are related to war, giving you a +1 strength in war for every wood in your kingdom, or giving you 1 victory point for each unit that has 3 strength or more in your kingdom. Again, wood and meat are the costs, and all of the other information, the side 2, and the 3 victory point scroll, and the reminder of the extra space in your front rank are all the same on all of the cards. They have the temple here, which just gives you 2 points during each war phase without any other requirements, and gives you 2 money. In addition, the temple is the only building that can be built with gold. The slash means or, so you can use a gem or 2 money, or 2 gems or 3 money. So you could pay 5 money just to build this on its level 2 side immediately. This is one of the buildings that is built most commonly simply because of that fact. At least in the games that I played. The tavern gives you money for every meat in your kingdom during the income phase, and then gives you victory points for every meat in your kingdom during war. And then last but not least is the town, which gives you the wood and meat when it's on level 1, and then gives you wood, meat, and a gem when it's on level 2. Those are the buildings. There is one additional thing. Whenever you're building a building, for every building you have to pay a 2 gold land tax to build another building. So if I already had 2 buildings in play and wanted to build a third, I would have to pay 4 gold in addition to whatever the cost of the building was in order to build it. That's one of the ways that money becomes very, very important, because if you want to build in the construction phase, you need money. Now, luckily, the income phase comes before the construction phase, so you gain any gold you're going to get before you build buildings. But remember, any gold that you spend to build buildings is gold that you will not have in the next round to deploy units. And we'll get into why that is important in the next phase here in just a second. But just something to keep in mind as you're playing the game, that while building buildings is great, spending a lot of money on buildings really diminishes your ability to get units onto the board for war. I cannot emphasize how important war is in this game, and we'll talk more about that a little later. Next is the aging phase. So this is one of the pieces of the game that is different from Seven Wonders, and that I feel is a little bit revolutionary as far as tableau builders go. I think I've seen it in a few other games, but in this game your units age out. They do not stay in your tableau forever. So when I build, for example, this blacksmith into my tableau, the first round that they're in play, when we hit the aging phase, I take one of these aging tokens and I just put it on this character. So this character is now aged. At the end of the next round, any character that, or in the aging phase, any character that has an aging token on it goes away. They're discarded from play. Doesn't matter how many aging tokens they have, just if they have an aging token, unless they say otherwise. So this blacksmith starts out with no aging tokens. In the first aging phase, it would gain an aging token. In its second aging phase, it would be discarded from play. So you kind of have to adapt as you go. You're going to have to pay for more units over time, because the units that you pay for initially are not going to just sit there. This is interesting because it means that really heavy investments still have a limited shelf life. You know, the demon, for example, here, when he flips, he gains an aging counter, and then you actually lose points if he dies with only 1 aging counter on him. So when you play him into play, he's 7 strength in war, which war is a really big deal. But he comes into play aged, meaning that if you hit the next aging phase, he's gone. He's only around for a turn. That said, you need to find a way to get another aging counter on him, because otherwise you'll lose 3 points just for putting him into play. So that'll negate one of the wars that you won, because if you win a war using him, you only get 3 points, making it an interesting card. But it's 2 gold to play this. So I spend 2 gold to get a unit that may win me a war and has an a special condition on it that makes it more difficult for him to actually have scored me points. So aging is something you have to pay attention to in this game. Your board is not going to remain static, it is going to change. The only cards that do not age are the buildings, and you can only gain one of them per turn. I say that the only ones that don't age are buildings, and that is true. There are some, however, that aren't penalized by aging. Most things go away with one aging counter. There's one exception, and I'll talk about that when I start talking about individual things to be aware of if you choose to play the game, and individual things to look out for. So, that's all 6 phases of the game. Recruitment, which is drafting. Deployment, which is placing cards in your tableau, flipping them over simultaneously and paying for them. Wars, fighting wars against your neighbors. Income, gaining money for the round. Construction, building or upgrading one building in a turn. And then aging, either putting aging tokens on units that haven't aged, or removing all units that have aged. Have at least one aging token on them already. You do that in the reverse order. You remove units first, and then you add aging tokens to whatever's left, obviously to reduce difficulties, but, that's where it stands. So, there's a couple of things I've talked about that are really you need to know about when you play this game, I feel. The first thing is that war is the major source of victory points in the game, in my experience. Most of the points that you get, like, if you win every war, every round, you are getting 6 points per 4 rounds for 24 points. Remember, you can only ever get 12 points from building buildings, not counting the abilities that they give you. But most of the victory points that they give you hinge on wars. Or the war phase. They come in the war phase, I guess I should say. They don't hinge on winning wars. Like, this one's just 2 points per war phase, which is less than winning a war. But if you're winning a war and getting these 2 points, that's 5 points. If you're only winning one war, or a full 8 points if you are winning both wars. This one gives you victory points for meat. This one gives you victory points for units with 3 or more strength, which if you have units with 3 or more strength, you're probably winning wars. And then this one gives you victory points for gems in your kingdom. But again, it's only 2. So buildings kind of stack with war, but war, in my experience, is the most prevalent source of points in the game. There are other things that give you points for war. For example, the Colossus here gives you 1 point for each war you win while it has. It's only 1 strength, but if it has an aging token on it, then it's 7 strength. Of course, it will go away if it has an aging token on it, so that's something to keep in mind. So that's one of the things to be aware of, is that war is very important. Unlike Seven Wonders, where you have a science strategy and you can totally eschew war, war is absolutely essential to pay attention to in this game if you want to win. That said, there are a couple of other things that exist in the game that are interesting, and most of them center around aging. So I'm going to hold up a card right now that if you visit the BGG forums or you look at any discussion of this game, comes up in every discussion of this game, and that is Relic. So, Relic is 2 cost, 0 strength, there's only 1 of them in the deck. In the aging phase, Relic does not die from having aging tokens on it, meaning that unlike other units having an aging token, Relic just hangs out with this aging token on it. It will gain 1 aging token every round that it is on the field during the aging phase. Then, here, it tells you that you get 2 victory points for every aging token that is on Relic at the end of the game. So you would think, okay, so big deal, it's 8 points if you play it in the first round. But that is not the case. This card has really heavy combo potential with multiple cards in the game which add aging tokens to units. So there are 3 of these guys in the deck. The Time Master. What they do is in the deployment phase, when they flip, they add 2 aging counters to a unit that you control. When I first saw this card, I thought, why would anybody ever want to do that? You're basically just killing your unit. This is why. There are a couple of other cards that give you benefits for having multiple aging tokens on them, but this card right here is the #1 reason why you want Time Masters in the deck. Because each one of these is essentially 4 points for the relic at the end of the game. There are 3 of them in the deck. If somebody drafts the relic and gets the Time Masters to fuel it, that is a ton of points. There's also the Necromancer here, who puts 1 on everybody's, on every unit that you control, which is another 2 points for the relic. Yet another thing to keep in mind. There's only 1 of him in the deck, but this card, if you draft it in the first round of the game, and you are able to get the Necromancer and all 3 of the Time Masters, you are probably going to win, regardless of what anybody else does. Now, this card is absolute trash, or mostly trash, if you draft it in the last round of the game. Because the most you can get on it is probably only a few counters. It may only be the 1 from aging. Getting 2 points from the card, not that great. But you could get an absolute ridiculous quantity of points from this card if you play it in the first round of the game. You can get 8 points from the aging counters it just accumulates naturally, plus another 12 from the Time Masters, meaning 20 points, plus another 2 from the Necromancer, bringing you to 22 points. So as you can see, this is a very large source of points if you see it early in the game. There are several groups that play without this card at all. They just remove it from the deck. And I can understand why. It is a very high-risk, high-reward card, however. If you are aware that that card is in the game, drafting Time Masters, even if you don't plan on playing them yourself, is not necessarily to your detriment. Just something to keep in mind. However, Time Masters have another use that's also pretty awesome, and that is with this card, the Palm Reader. Now, there are 2 Palm Readers in the deck, as you can see here, but the Palm Reader basically gives you a point for every aging token that is on one of your units when it dies. Normally, it dies with 1 aging unit. That's still 1 point, but with Time Masters, you can make it 3 points pretty easily. If you have multiple Time Masters and a Palm Reader, you can stack lots of tokens on things. There are also 2 of these, so if you have 2 of them in play and can get additional aging tokens on things, you can accumulate a lot of points in 1 turn pretty quickly. So this is another reason Time Master exists. The Kraken here also gives you 1 point for every aging token on your units when they die. It's quite a bit more expensive, however. So that's a thing to keep in mind. However, it does add an aging token to all of your units whenever it flips, so it could also throw aging tokens on Relic if you wanted to pay $6 to do so. So that's 24 points, I guess, for the Relic now. There's also Monkey, which gives you a gold, and then you earn gold for every aging token on Monkey when it dies. So throwing tokens on Monkey using the Time Master or one of the other cards is a really good way to get some money. It also gives you a money when you deploy it, which is pretty cool. And then the Sculptor just gets 3 points when it dies, just inherently in the aging phase. So throwing aging tokens on it when you first play it means that you don't have to wait 2 turns with it in a slot before you get its ability. Another thing to keep in mind. So aging as a mechanism is something that I find very, very interesting in the game. And I think maybe the only pathway to victory that isn't heavily war-centric. If you ignore war in this game, you are going to lose. You can ignore buildings in this game. However, building buildings early is better than building buildings late. 3 points is not a large amount of points in the game. Normally, we were having people finish in the 30s or 40s. We never had anybody lap the scoreboard. Nobody ever got to 49. But 30s and 40s is typical. So 3 points for one building is just like a tenth of your score. A lot more of your points are going to be scored in wars. Each war is only 3 points as well. You just get 2 opportunities at those per turn instead of the 1 opportunity per building per turn. If you miss an opportunity to place a level 2 building into play immediately and have to build the level 1 and then later upgrade it, that gets incredibly expensive. And is really diminishing returns as far as points go. There is another character to mention, and I'll see if I can find one. That is going to help with a building strategy, and that is specifically this guy right here, the Golem. When you play the Golem, when you flip them in the deployment phase, they let you turn all of your level 1 buildings into level 2. This guy is very bad in the early game, but in the late game, if you get one of these and you have a lot of level 1 buildings, they can save you a lot of headaches and single-handedly get you a lot of points. There are only 2 of them in the deck. We never had one come out late in the game. However, I did see people use them to very good effect in like the second and third round after they'd spent their first turn building a building on its first side. Being able to upgrade a building without and not have that take your upgrade action for the round is very, very powerful if you can pull it off and time it right. There's also one unit in here that makes it so that you do not have to pay land cost when building additional buildings, so it's not nearly as expensive. There's also one who lets you substitute the Master Architect. I'm not going to try to find it because there's only one in the deck, but the Master Architect lets you pay gold instead of resources in order to build buildings, which is also really useful for a building-heavy strategy. I say building heavy strategy, but again, you're only ever going to get 4 buildings maximum, because you can only build 1 a round, regardless of which side you build it on. So that's kind of where it's at. So what do I think about the game? Well, the game plays super fast. It's faster than Seven Wonders, even, because a lot of the turns are done simultaneously. Recruitment is drafting, which is done simultaneously. Deployments is flipping all of your cards and paying for them simultaneously. Wars are conducted against each other simultaneously. Income is collected simultaneously. Construction is done simultaneously. Aging is done simultaneously. There aren't individual player turns as every player reveals, oh, I'm going to play this card and slide it under my wonder, or I'm going to, And Seven Wonders is also simultaneous in that regard, but in this one, there's less to pay attention to because there are fewer cards on the table. The most cards you will have on the table in front of you is 5 in your tableau and 4 buildings, so 9 cards on the table in front of each player. Seven Wonders has considerably more cards in front of each player for most of the game. Midway through, the second age, you're looking at that many cards easily. So yeah, it's much easier to pay attention to what's going on everybody else's area. In addition, because cards age, you only really need to do a status check in the round that you're in, as some cards will fade away before it's relevant to you as a whole. I don't believe you can discount buildings entirely. I think you need the 3rd slot in your front row if you're going to win wars later in the game. Again, war is very important. So you need to build at least 1 building. If you have to choose one building, then the easiest one to build is the temple, because you can pay gold for it, and it gives you gold income, which makes that a little bit less painful. It also gives you 2 victory points per war phase if you build it on level 2. So the soonest you can get this into the game, the better. Now, I think almost everybody's going to build this, so these 2 points kind of cancel out as you go, but you don't want to be the only one that doesn't have it, and it's a really good way to get that 5th slot so that you can win wars. The other buildings all have their uses. This one, the tavern, can actually be more points if you have a lot of meat in your kingdom, and there are several units that synergize with meat. Both Cerberus becomes 3 strength instead of 2, and the Manticore, which gets 2 strength per meat, both synergize with that really, really well. So there are a couple other avenues to doing things in the game, depending on what you get, but war is the central part of the game, and I think that's the one major downside that I have with Paper Tales, is that it really seems like, unlike Seven Wonders where you can completely eschew a warlike path, you cannot win this game without paying attention to and involving yourself in wars. Now, is that a bad thing? I don't know. It's a core phase of the game, so ignoring an entire phase of the game maybe is a flaw in some aspects. But in this regard, it really felt like, war is where it's at. Pay attention to war, win all of the wars you can, and you're going to do pretty darn well for yourself, regardless of what else you do. So that some of the more vanilla units, like the Knight, which has just 4 strength and no ability, is really, really good to have in your front row. Another unit that cares about aging, the Militia Man, gets +1 strength for each aging counter on it. Starts at 2, but can get pretty big if you're using Time Masters, which also cost 0. So it can be a really cheap way to set up a really powerful war engine if you can't afford some of the bigger cards. I think it's a very tight game. The number of cards you get is a very tight amount. The amount of money that you get is a very tight amount. The amount of resources you get is very tight. Everything in the game feels much tighter than Seven Wonders, where it's fairly easy to get a lot of the stuff that you need, particularly because you can spend resources on other people's boards if you're willing to pay money. That doesn't exist in this game. There is no trading as such, so you can't pay money to other people in order to use their resources to build your stuff. You have to have it personally, which is more limiting, and I think one of the things that really hampers a building strategy, compared to a building strategy in Seven Wonders where you just focus on war, or science, and use other people's resources to make that happen for you, since you focused on those cards instead of building resources. It plays faster than Seven Wonders. It doesn't play as many players as Seven Wonders. It's, I feel, easier to understand. The iconography is extremely clear, and there is not a lot of it. It is consistent across the board. They don't use different icons for the same things anywhere. And the icons that tell you which phase something happens in are super helpful when scanning a board to realize what's relevant and what isn't relevant. I did not see anyone miss an ability trigger over the course of any of my 3 games of Paper Tales, which for a game that has a lot of text on cards, relatively speaking, is really, really good. I really like the game. I don't know if it has a lot of legs for me right now. I've played it 3 times, and while I don't feel like I've seen everything it has to offer, This could easily be one of those games that you play with your significant other or your family over and over and over again 100 times, and every time the cards come out differently, you'll see a different way that you can utilize them to your advantage. The combo aspect of it is really good, but I don't know if I want to devote that much of my gaming time to get that experience out of Paper Tales. I do not know what the expansion adds. I definitely want to look into that and see if maybe an expansion would add some more cards to each of the various strategies and kind of enhance or shore up some of the weaker strategies or bring down some of the more powerful strategies in the game. I'm interested to see that, and might be willing to shell out money for an expansion to see that. So I like it. I think it's a good game. I think if you don't have Seven Wonders, this is a really good alternative. I think if you want a game that plays similar to Seven Wonders but is faster, this is a really good bet. I think if you just inherently like drafting games, this is a pretty damn good one. It's more complicated than Sushi Go. I don't think it's as complicated as Seven Wonders, although some of the combo aspects may not be realized immediately by players who aren't used to card games or lots of combo triggering abilities. But I think it's a good game. I think it's well designed. I think it plays really well. And really clearly. Everything in the game is really easy to understand and obvious as far as what it does. Nobody had to consult any of the rule book ever after we learned how to play. Like, we never even looked at the rule book after that. So I don't think you can go wrong with this one. I just don't know that it is for everybody. If you're looking for a heavier drafting experience, this is not it. This is very quick, fairly light game that gives you that similar drafting tableau building experience of Seven Wonders with a very different aesthetic and art style. The aging mechanism in the game, I think, is the major highlight. I'm glad that there are so many cards that focus on it and implement it, because I think it is one of the coolest aspects of this particular game. It forces you to play more tactical than strategic, which I think will give a lot of younger players or less hardcore card gamers or board gamers a leg up when it comes to being able to compete in the course of the game. There is luck of the draw, as some of the cards are just one-ofs in the deck, but the cards that are 2s or 3s of are pretty, like, beefy core cards in their own right. I don't think there are any cards in this game that are dead weight. I don't think there are any cards in this game that have no use or that are horrible. All of them have a use for pretty much everybody. And because you're only drafting 5 cards a round, you kind of have to make do with what you get. And the fact that many of the cards are so combo-centric really highlights that fact for me. It can be painful if you get a whole bunch of pieces to different combos that don't interact with each other. But for the most part, that never happened as far as I could tell. Even the players who did the worst in the game still were able to pull off combos using the cards that they had. Drafting cheaper cards is important because you don't get a lot of money in the game. So learning how to use the 0 and 1 cost cards to your benefit is very important. The big heavy hitters are cool, and you can build your entire strategy around them, but they all need support. And getting the support on the board first sometimes is better than getting the support later in the game, unless you're playing the Relic, in which case you need the Relic as early as you possibly can. That said, it's a good game. I like it. I think that it has a place in a lot of people's collections, and that you could do much worse with drafting games than picking up this one. So on that note, Paper Tales. Good game. Check it out. Anyway, I'm going to let you guys go because this has been long enough already, and I'll talk to you later. Bearded Rogue, out.